Okay, good afternoon, everyone. It's 2:05 in the afternoon. My name is Pablo Avila from the Center for Teaching and Learning, and I have my colleague Priscilla from the center as well. Thank you for joining us for this session this afternoon. Our colleagues from the Wellness Center are going to introduce themselves in just a moment, but we thank them in advance for running this session on supporting students' well-being during this time. Just a couple of logistics before we get started. If you are joining us from a computer, right on the bottom of your screen, you should be able to see the chat button. If you're able to see that, we invite you to click on it and type in your name and the department where you come from. We're going to be using the chat room heavily as we move along in the session. Our colleagues are going to start the presentation. They will run the presentation, and then my colleague Priscilla and I are going to monitor the chat room so that we can bring up questions as we move along. Our presenters are also going to allow time at the very end for Q&A so that you can bring up a question or comment, and we will discuss that. We're also recording this session so that we can make it available for later for you who want to revisit the session, but also others who were not available to join us. I will be sure to send that out via email to everyone. Priscilla, are there any other logistics that I'm forgetting?
No, I think we're good.
No? All right, great. So once again, use the chat room to share questions, concerns as we move along. And now I'm gonna hand it over to our colleagues, Matthew, Shante, and Frank. Go right ahead.
Hello, everyone. This is Frank LaTerra, Director of the Wellness Center.
Matthew Joffe, Director of Outreach and Education in the Wellness Center.
And I'm Shante Bassett. I am the psychologist in the Wellness Center and also the director of the graduate internship program in the Wellness Center.
So thank you all for joining us today. First and foremost, we want to wish you and your families well. We hope everyone, including yourself, are in good health. Matthew, we could put up the presentation now.
Actually, I can't. Pablo?
I'm right here.
It's disabled.
There you go. One click solves everything. I'll be able to share it.
Just let me know when you're ready.
Yep, you can go ahead and try now.
Okay, I'm good. As soon as I find it. Here we are.
All right. Thank you, Matthew.
Pleasure.
So just to give a little structure to our presentation today, we're going to spend the first half, which is about 20 to 30 minutes, spending time discussing how recent events have impacted our students' mental health and well-being, and how we can best support them while we all go through this unprecedented time. As Pablo mentioned, we want to leave enough time to hear your questions and listen to your concerns. So the second half of the presentation will be approximately 30 minutes. So to give some context and to provide an overview, the purpose of our presentation today is to inform about how traumatic events like a major global pandemic can cause psychological distress and impact one's mental health, and in particular, our students. So for today's presentation, we look to answer some of the following questions. What types of behavior are being displayed by our students who are dealing with distress in their lives? I'm sure for some of you or all of you, you've already witnessed students behaving differently than they have in the past. So just beginning to pay more attention to how these behavior changes can be connected to distress. And then we also want to talk about how are students responding in terms of their coping ability or inability to cope with the stressors that are occurring in our lives. So we'll talk more about that as we go along in the presentation. We also look to share best practices today that will help faculty, again, recognize signs of distress. So what behaviors should we be aware of that may be a sign of a student who's really struggling? And again, perhaps you've already observed some of these behaviors play out. For example, a student who has withdrawn, who's no longer participating in coursework. That again may be a sign of a student who's struggling and in distress. We're also going to provide suggestions about creating an environment where students can feel supported during this transition to online learning. And I'm sure most of you who have already done that and helping students make that adjustment. But what structures can we put in place to keep the lines of communication open? And then lastly, we would like to provide some resources, mental health resources that can be available to you in the event that you are observing a student who is, again, in distress. And I'll also mention that we, the team at the Wellness Center, are available to speak with anyone who wants to provide more information about a student that they're concerned about. We'll provide our office hours at the conclusion of the presentation, but a phone call or an email will respond back as quickly as possible and listen to what your concerns are, provide feedback. Next slide, Matthew. Nope, the previous slide.
Oh, sorry.
Slide 3.
Here you go. Sorry.
Slide 3.
Yeah, sorry. Sorry.
There we go. So, just to provide some context, I'd like to remind our audience that we've all gone through a major life event that has resulted in abrupt changes to our lives, our livelihood, our families, etc. Over the last 2 months or so, our country has been on lockdown and our lives have transformed. And so for our students, there was a sudden change in learning, going from in-person to distance learning. So being on campus, engaging with professors and peers, to having to abruptly change to being at home. And not only being at home, but learning sort of on the go, these new platforms that we're all still learning to use, whether it's Zoom, WebEx, Blackboard, etc. Really learning to manage these platforms while the semester is occurring. Lastly, we and our students have had to learn to cope with major concerns in our life, one of them being medical concerns. So whether our students are ill or they're taking care of a loved one who's ill, this has been, again, a huge transition. So we'll talk about how students, again, are coping with that. We've, at the Wellness Center, have been working with students who are pursuing counseling, and they've shared with us that they're caring for a loved one while still working and still being a student. And so many stressors on many levels our students are facing and managing. So we have the medical issues that we'll talk more about. And also in terms of family structures. So perhaps not being able to see loved ones. I think for many of us, we're facing that as well. Being able to once see parents or grandparents to no longer being able to be connected. And also having to live with family on a 24/7 basis and the stress that could be presented from that. So again, just a real abruptness to all of our lives, and for our students, managing all of these facets of their lives, including medical and family issues. And then lastly, again, for all of us, but for our students in particular, not being able to go about their normal routine, being able to, go to campus, walk about campus, to engage again with their peers. So, all these factors play into the increased stress that our students are facing. Next slide, Matthew. So what has happened in this short period and the sudden shift to distance learning has caused numerous challenges for our students. And in this slide, we'll talk about some of them. For one, our students may not have the technology available at home to be properly set up for learning. Perhaps they don't have access to Wi-Fi or a device. Perhaps they're sharing devices with others in their family, so they have to sort of split time. So that is, again, a major challenge that we've, again, have learned from our students who are in counseling. Students may not have available space to engage in classwork and to study. So I'm guessing, and we've, again, gotten feedback that there's been an uptick in distractions at home because of other families being present, other family members being present, taking on additional tasks at home. We know that our students, some of them, share small spaces with their loved ones. So, the lack of privacy has been an issue for us at the Wellness Center, where our students can't participate in a counseling session because they have other people around. So we've had to sort of work around that, but it is a continued challenge for our students. And I imagine the same is happening when they're trying to engage in the classroom. I'll also mention here, and we'll talk more about it, but for many of our students who are now home 24/7 with family members, the dynamics that have played out prior to this are sort of magnified. So for example, we've had recently students who have discussed having to face domestic violence more so than in the past. So just, again, being around people that you may not want to be around, to put it frankly. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that today as well. Again, it's a blessing to be around family, but for many of our students, it may present additional stressors and more challenges to them. The other thing to mention is that our students have less contact with their peers and social support groups, which again may increase stress as well as isolation, feelings of isolation. So for many of our students, going to campus was a sanctuary for them. For, again, some of the students that I've engaged with over the years, they would spend the whole day on campus and make it part of sort of their full day to be engaged with students, to be participating in activities. The more extreme example, but very much a real example, are those students who are homeless and who used campus as a sanctuary, as a place to stay, as opposed to being in a shelter or being about in the city. And so again, just numerous challenges that we've have heard from our students in the last several weeks. Lastly, those students with a disability may be struggling with accessibility to technology that is needed and or accommodations that support their learning. So this is, again, some of the information that we're learning from students who have reached out to us, that, again, the sudden, abrupt change, particularly for students with disabilities, has been difficult. And so these are just some of the challenges. I'm sure you have all heard of more. So we'll talk about that as we go on. So I'm going to transition here to Shante, who will now discuss some of the mental health concerns that we've encountered and learned about from our students.
Thank you, Frank. So one might ask, well, how, of course, the pandemic is affecting us in many areas of our lives, but how is our mental health, and how will the mental health of our students be affected by all of the things that Frank just mentioned? So here are a few examples, and just a caveat, this is by no means an exhaustive list. So an increase in anxiety, depression, and a sense of isolation, which may be reflected in behavior, in writing, and communication. So of course, we've all transitioned to distance learning. So our main form of communication with our students is in writing and communication. So you might start to notice even a change in how a person communicates with you, how your student communicates with you. Maybe they're reaching out to you more frequently. Their wording might be a little erratic and maybe a bit tangential. That could be the result of an increase in anxiety, depression, and other mental health challenges. Increased risk of substance misuse. So students might have used substances occasionally before, but now because they're home all the time, they might be using it more frequently, have greater access to it. So that's another way. And also students might be utilizing substances to self-medicate the things in the bullet prior. So the anxiety, depression, feeling isolated, not being able to connect with other students and other loved ones. Increase in violence in the home, for example, domestic violence, and Frank spoke to this as well. There has been an increase in domestic violence reports. A lot of students came to campus to escape. It was a safe haven for them, like Frank said. So now they are unfortunately not stationed, but what's the word? Sheltering in place with the person who is abusing them, whether it's physical abuse or mental or emotional abuse. Interpersonal problems with family members, and that could be related to the previous bullet. Having difficulty not really being able to communicate with certain family members effectively. Sometimes you can go out and take a walk. Sometimes you can go out and maybe go to the mall and just relate to your friends and other people, but we don't have that opportunity, and neither do our students. A lack of motivation or concentration, unable to be productive, manage time, and easily distracted. So you might be in a Zoom meeting, although I know many professors have moved away from that. You might have been in a Zoom meeting or a Google Classroom and seen a student looking everywhere but the screen where the PowerPoint is being presented. That doesn't mean that the student is just uninterested. They could be having a really tough time transitioning to distance learning. They might be distracted by what else is going on in their home because they might be living with multiple family members or having to take care of children. Also, a lack of motivation. You might find that assignments might not be submitted in a timely manner. Some professors might think, you're home, what else do you have to do? But there are a lot of other things that our students are up against and dealing with in the midst of the pandemic. Feeling overwhelmed by information, and this is a big one, and I know that our professors, our faculty can definitely attest to this because, once we heard that we would be transitioning to distance learning, there were a lot of emails. There's even a listserv for those who are teaching during the semester and need assistance with Blackboard and things of that nature. So imagine how it feels for our students to be overwhelmed with information, and not just information concerning school, but information concerning family members who might not be living with them. They might not be able to contact them. A flood of information from the media, hearing the constant reports of how many people have contracted COVID, the number of deaths and how they're rising and things like that. So we have to be mindful that just in the same way that we feel overwhelmed by information sometimes, our students are experiencing very much the same thing. Experiencing discrimination, especially for Asian and Asian American students. And we know that Interim President Arcario sent out an email concerning this. This is something that our students might not even report, but if they've experienced it, they might present with some of the aforementioned mental health challenges. And last, but certainly not least on this slide, an increase in grief and loss as loved ones die from the virus. And we'll go a little bit deeper into grief and loss in a few slides, but the fact is that a lot of our students are probably affected by grief and loss because of the death of a loved one, whether it's someone who's in their immediate family or someone they knew, their barista or the person they used to get their bacon, egg, and cheese from at the corner store. This is something that our students are experiencing, just like many other people in the world. Matthew, you can move to the next slide. Thanks so much.
Welcome.
So this side is, did you have something, Matthew?
No, go ahead.
Okay, so this slide is really important because it shows us the connection between how we manage our response in the midst of the pandemic, and how that's going to affect how our students respond in the midst of this pandemic. So the first point you see is modeling healthy behavior and self-care practices. Once you are centered, you have the capacity to positively affect the learning environment. And some of you might have experienced this. If you just got a call that a loved one might have been in a minor accident and it was like minutes before you had to run into the classroom, you might be frazzled. You might have left your pointer on your office desk. So when you are anxious and frazzled in that way, it can affect your students. So it's the same way when it comes to distance learning. But when you have centered yourself and been mindful of your self-care strategies, that creates a safer and calmer atmosphere for the students. So because you've calmed yourself, the social environment is affected. If you are relaxed, then your students are more inclined to be relaxed. You've created a relaxed atmosphere for not only yourself, but your students as well. Acknowledging the moment. We are all in this together. We see those signs everywhere, but it is true. We are all experiencing this pandemic. We might not have experienced a close loss. Maybe we have. We might not be responding to it in the same way, but the fact is we are all here living this. And it's important for faculty members to realize that. And it's okay. We don't have to keep that part of ourselves away from our students. We're all bombarded with the news and stories, and they can be triggering. So we're not inviting people, you're not inviting students to tell about their suffering and to share, but there is a way that you can join with your students and they can join with each other so that they know that they are not alone. And practicing compassionate acceptance for yourself and for your students. If you've accepted the fact that, you know what, I might not particularly be a fan of not being on campus because I like, having that FaceTime with my students. I enjoy having face-to-face office hours, etc. Accepting the situation for what it is, accepting your response to it, and allowing yourself to experience it. If your students see that you are transparent, of course, within reason, they will in turn feel safe to maybe come to you with some concerns. Maybe they don't have the technology they have. If they see that you are open and accepting, then they will be more inclined to be open with you so that you can be a support to them while they're going through this difficult time.
Shante, if I could
Yes.
just interrupt just one moment.
Absolutely.
I just want to ask Matthew, for the full screen, if you could just click enable editing.
Okay, done.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, enable editing and then slideshow.
Yeah, and it's slideshow and start slideshow.
And then current slide.
Mm-hmm.
From current slide.
Great. Thank you,
awesome.
Matthew.
Perfect. Okay, so now we're going to shift it over to Matthew, I believe. Or is that still me?
That's still you.
Oh, okay. Something didn't sound right when I said that. Okay, so how do we set the tone and create an environment for learning? And not just any environment, but a safe and relaxed environment. You can just click. Okay. Okay, so first we're going to express appreciation for what's going on. Appreciate that despite the suffering students have arrived with, intention to focus their attention on the present moment. Remind them that they are not alone. So it's something as simple as saying, you know what, I'm so glad that all of you made it for class today. That can be impactful for our students because we don't know what they dealt with in order to get on the Zoom or to log in or to get that assignment in on time. Be sensitive and recognize students' special circumstances. And sometimes this can be difficult. I've heard professors say, well, we don't know if they're telling the truth or not. But oftentimes it's best to err on the side of not caution, but compassion, and understanding that because we're experiencing distance learning at this time, we don't know what they're going through. So it's important that we be sensitive and be aware of how we communicate with our students, as well as how they communicate with us, which I mentioned earlier. Be flexible, but set limits. So give options and flexibility to demonstrate learning objectives, but at the same time, have a thick skin, because just like we might be having difficulty transitioning, maybe there are probably professors who are teaching online for the first time ever this semester. So just like it's your first time, it's going to be the first time for many of your students as well. So they might speak to you in a manner, I'm not saying that disrespect is should be tolerated, but they might just be irritable, and it might not have anything to do with you. Avoid making COVID-19 a constant point of reference or discussion. I'm sure that at least one person on this Zoom right now has had to turn off the news, has had to just sign off of social media, because if it wasn't a meme about COVID-19, it was a statistic about COVID-19, and that can be absolutely overwhelming and triggering. Next slide, please, Matthew.
And I think that's me.
All right, so we are going to transition over to Matthew.
So I want to talk about 5 things that can be done which would set the tone to create an environment for learning. First, of course, is self-care in the classroom, which Shante and Frank have referenced earlier today. There are a number of things you can consider doing, such as CALM, which stands for chest, arms, legs, and mouth, which is a way of just sort of checking in with yourself and becoming focused and being in the moment to maximize learning. Humor is also something that's really terrific. The pandemic is such a crisis, we have to find a way to laugh at what's going on, even though it's so serious, so we can keep our head above water. And doing it in the classroom can sort of break the ice and keep the tone playful and keep the learning going forward. The third is creating virtual office hours, which I'm sure everybody in the audience has already done, so that students know there's a time and a place they can go to get help, and all of these instructors could also set boundaries so they don't feel as if they're on call, which is very important. And of course, to be aware of other mental health and other kinds of resources, both on campus as well as off campus, and we'll be giving you at the end a number of references in the form of a kind of virtual handout that Pablo will get to you, that you can use, and we'll go over briefly about what's out there to help all of us. And then, of course, there's the issue of addressing an emergency, okay? Always call 911, or if it's a non-emergency, but you want to have somebody intervene, there's a mobile crisis program, and the Wellness Center can be of help in facilitating that with you. Communicating with students. Oops. So the first one is, I'm feeling overwhelmed, scared, concerned, confused. The response could be, thanks for bringing this up and sharing it with me. These are definitely uncertain times. It sounds like talking with someone about this could be helpful for you. I'd be happy to help connect you with a campus resource who could offer some support. So this is another way that somebody perhaps who is not necessarily familiar with mental health challenges and how to approach a student. This is sort of a mini generalized script that you could use to open up the conversation. And the other is I can't focus. I'm really struggling with getting my work done. Given what's going on in the world, I can understand it must be difficult for you to focus right now. And of course, Frank referenced this in the beginning about adapting to distance learning and the struggles of learning the mechanics on both sides. Some students have mentioned that it's been helpful to have someone to talk to and have reached out to the Wellness Center for support. And you can also go to the website, which is for faculty and staff. We have a separate website for students. Whoops, I think I went too fast. How do I get back? Okay, try this again. So I want to talk about an acronym, HEART. Hear what the student is saying. Empathize with student situations. Assess what the student's needs are. Refer to campus resources and utilize the after-hours hotline, which is New York City government-sponsored NYC Well 1-888 NYC Well. And lastly, tell the appropriate campus official or department and contact 911 if it's an emergency. Hopefully look brief. And again, folks, my colleagues have talked about this. Find balance in their thoughts. Bring it into the present. Grounding, breathing, and mindfulness techniques can be very helpful. People need to learn, students, how to let go what they can't control. Be good to yourself. Self-compassion is critical and often the last thing we think of doing. Self-kindness versus self-judgment. We tend to be very critical. It seems to be almost a natural impulse to find the dark side rather than the positive side. A sense of common humanity. I gotta get rid of these pictures, they're blocking my view. And that is versus being isolated. So even though we're alone in lockdown, there are numerous ways we can affect a community for ourselves. Mindfulness versus over-identification, which is swept away by negative reactions and feelings. You have to sort of control what you expose yourself to. There's a lot of stuff going out in the media, and people talk about it on social media as well. And it's easy to get sort of sucked in. So this is a way to help students to focus on the present rather than the sort of gloom and doom future that is being conjured up sometimes. Practicing self-care. Eating, staying hydrated, and getting enough rest. It's so important to do all of these things, as well as exercise. If you can, in your neighborhood, go out and get some fresh air and practice all the guidelines. Go ahead and do so. Increasing resilience, which of course is what separates humans from all other animals, our ability to bounce back. And the question that they could be asked is, how did you cope and persevere in the past when you lost somebody? Okay. Chances are everybody that may have lost somebody during the COVID, it's not their first time, perhaps. How did they manage to get through it then? What can they learn from that and use now so that they can get through this loss also? Be confident in your strengths and abilities. Students can be very doubtful. We want to help them during this crisis period to not lose the focus and belief in themselves and what they have to bring to the table, their table of life. Making modifications. You may not be 100% due to your stress and grief, and that's normal. And they need to understand that. Certainly their focus in school is going to be compromised while they're grieving and mourning. There's no way around it. They can try, but it's still going to creep in and impact their day-to-day functioning. Make small changes to your daily tasks and schedules because they're more manageable. If you try to completely overhaul things, chances are it's not going to be nearly as successful. And reach out to your loved ones. Even though physical distance is prevalent, it doesn't mean you have emotional distance automatically. Zooming with friends or FaceTime on the phone, it's not the same, but it's a way to connect with emotions and other people other than an email, which can be very sterile, or a phone call, which is nice, but it's nice to have a face to go with the person you're talking to. When you grieve alone, the suffering increases. So it's important to share with your loved ones and friends how you're feeling. Students need to be able to experience that. Now, this is the first of these so-called handouts that you will get. And there's a lot of information on here. I'm just going to highlight rather than go through everything and bore everybody into a slumber. So, number one, the 4 A's of stress management: avoid, alter, adapt, and accept. So avoid unnecessary stress, which means learning how to say no. We tend to always say yes because we think that's what other people want to hear. But if you learn to set boundaries and say, no, I can't do that today, you're actually protecting yourself, and students need to learn how to do that. Taking control of the environment. Alter the situation. Talking about feelings. Talking about feelings is very important. Create a balanced schedule. I've had students tell me they're going to study in 8 hours for an exam, and I tell them you're never going to make it. The brain can't handle it. They need to mix things up. Classes, study time, fun time. Otherwise, they're not going to make it through the term. Reframe problems. Try to view stressful situations in a positive light, looking at the big picture, and practice gratitude. What are we all grateful for? When you're stressed, it's important to stop and ask yourself, what's going well for me? And of course, accept the things you can't change. Don't try to control the uncontrollable. It can't be done. And the energy expended is horrifically large, and you can't get it back. And of course, again, share your feelings. Talk to a trusted friend or get them to talk to a counselor. Okay?
Hey, Matthew.
Yes, sir.
Sorry to interrupt. I just want to let you know that we have about 15 minutes left, roughly.
Yeah, I'm very aware. I'm watching the clock.
Okay.
I know. I will go into high gear. So basically, you have a global crisis. You have the COVID hotline that Governor Cuomo has, and you have an 888 NYC well, which you can also text to. And that is it for the presentation. And now it's Q&A time.
So as Matthew mentioned, we'll have those resources available after the presentation. We'll make sure to provide, we'll give Pablo these slides and then he'll pass it on to those who participated today. So we were anticipating that this presentation would go on a little longer just because there's so much to cover in a short amount of time. But we do have about 15 minutes to answer any questions. And of course, if anybody has any other questions that they won't be able to ask today, please feel free to reach out to us and we'll be glad to respond back to you.
I can bring up one question that came up on the chat room. I think it has been addressed in some ways, but the question is, what are some effective strategies you can suggest to bring the human element when face-to-face classes are not possible? In synchronized classes, most students keep their cameras off, and it's understandable as they might not feel comfortable doing so. This can, however, lead to learning in isolation. Are there any pointers in addition to what you have shared that you could share in response to that?
I mean, I would first suggest, again, as we've talked about today, just I think being real with students is really important. You know, stating the obvious that we are all going through a really difficult and unprecedented time in our human history. So to bring realness to the situation, and to also acknowledge that this transition is very difficult. You bring up the point about showing your face on camera. Just as a point of reference, because I learned this recently, I think Shante might have actually mentioned it to me. Some of our students might be embarrassed to show where they live, right? It's really a thing that I hadn't considered, but to also acknowledge that for our students, again, being at home is a major transition and a place where they might not want to be, let alone show to their peers and their professor. So just to keep that in mind. So as an overall, just to be sensitive to where we're at as a community, as our humanity, and then to also acknowledge that our students may be struggling. And I'll also say this, I actually counseled a student on Friday who said he was doing great, that he was actually happy to be home and that his commute time, not having to commute saved him time to do the things that he was interested in. So there's a spectrum, right? So some students might be really struggling, and then there are others who are, okay, and they're resilient and they're doing just fine. So just to acknowledge the whole spectrum and to be real with our students. Shante and Matthew, I don't know if you want to add.
In the interest of time, ditto. I think if you refer to the tips and pointers that we have in the PowerPoint and the handouts that you're going to receive, I think all of those things come together to create, like I said, a safe environment for our students. If they don't turn on their camera, then let them know that you're available for check-ins and the chat is available, and try your best not to make it punitive if their screen isn't on. Give them alternatives.
An additional question that comes up on the chat room, it reads the following. I have an adjunct who has just reached out to me. His student has lost everyone in his household and he's too overwhelmed to finish the semester. Is there a way he can withdraw and it won't penalize him? I heard there's about a medical withdrawal, but not sure if this would fall under it. It may be a challenging question in terms of the withdrawal part, but I wonder, Frank, Shante, and Matthew, if you could offer any guidance as to what kind of support can be provided to this adjunct in supporting that student.
A medical withdrawal, and Matthew and Frank, you can definitely chime in, would apply. If the student is mentally having difficulty functioning, they would definitely be, I would encourage them to apply. The only challenge with that is that you usually need some kind of medical paperwork that says you're having, this particular challenge. However, these are unprecedented times. So I would still encourage the student to try and see, because the requirements might be relaxed during such a time as this. I would still encourage the student to pursue that.
If I can jump in as well, you would definitely want to contact Luz Royale in the health center, who handles the medical leaves. And I would encourage the adjunct to ask and work with the student. I think that if he or she could acquire death certificates of these people, that would be in lieu of any kind of medical diagnosis of an emotional disturbance and grief. And I think they would be successful in negotiating the medical leave. You just have to remember, you have to check with the financial aid dimension of it as well, and should be done before signing all kinds of things officially. But as Shante said, the rule book is being written as we speak. So I think that all of the original rulings may not apply right now, but it's definitely something that you should pursue.
Thank you. Neetu, I think you had a question. Go right ahead.
Oh, yeah, this is in the follow-up about the question about the camera. I never make it compulsory, and I think it is the right thing to do, to make it like an optional. But then, like, you know, they're like at least one student who asked me, like, we were having like a general discussion that how they are missing that human element, you know, and they feel isolated, not about just one course, but overall.
Yeah.
So, you know, I totally agree with the respect, and camera shouldn't be, you know, made compulsory. And I personally feel the same. I also sometimes don't feel comfortable sharing my own camera, you know. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't, you know. So it equally applies to the professor as well as the students. But, you know, like some of the human elements, you know, because this can go to the fall too. We don't know, you know. And right now it's like still the beginning, you know. They have been to this process like 1 month or so, but you know, if it goes prolonged, you know, how long they are able to cope up with that, and what could be the effective strategies, you know. I mean, my students are very active in chat. I'm not like very you know chat person but I'm trying to catch, you know, keep up with that. But what other suggestions, you know, like from the you know, professor point of view, if the student, you know, they like that student you know, on a journal basis asking like how long this will go, and I like my classes face to face, you know, I'm missing that human element, you know. So it's like I don't know what answer. I mean, we try. He was talking about all the courses overall that he's taking, so I don't know. I just told him that, you know, there are pictures in the book, and I sometimes provide, you know, some short videos and those kind of things, and have synchronous class. At least they can hear my voice. I'm just trying, you know. I don't know what else can be done.
Yeah, I think to tease out a question that you might have had in that is about, you know, what's going to happen in the future if a student asks in some form. And I think, you know, the future is unknown to all of us, which can be a really scary place to be. But as we've talked a little bit about today, accepting the moment as it is right now might be a helpful exercise that you conduct with your students, whether it's in written form or in discussion. But, you know, what does it feel like to not know what's going to happen next week, you know, next semester and beyond? It is a scary place to be, but also I think an opportunity to engage in discussion about how people are able to cope and also self-soothe. Just a thought.
And another thing is that it also, I have read like articles where I have read that being on computer for too long, you know, can cause anxiety, you know. Do you have any suggestion for that?
I know for me, I haven't read anything specifically about screen time, although I know there's some new research coming out about that, but I haven't really had the opportunity to knowledge myself. I don't know, Shante or Matthew, if you have anything.
I can't refer to a specific article either, but in that vein, I would encourage professors as much as possible to mix it up a bit. And Professor, you mentioned sometimes assigning videos and there being pictures. Definitely be versatile in how you present the material. That will help it from getting, prevent it from being monotonous for the students. And it also gives them a sense of expectancy, like, oh, well, I don't know how she's going to present today. I don't know how he's going to conduct the discussion piece today. And that may, even increase their motivation to not only come to class, but be present in class.
I could share personally as well. Last week was, for me, number of meetings every day through Zoom. And I was exhausted at the end of the day. And I had been sitting for most of the day. So again, it speaks to just when you're not moving and you're not sort of burning energy, but you're sitting, you're sedentary and you're staring for long periods of time, how that can impact you. So as Shante is saying, shake it up as much as possible. Maybe get your students to move around a bit during class, if that's possible. Just, I think for all of us, being creative is really important right now.
Yeah, I agree. Like many students are finding it very exciting. They are very, engaged, and most of the students, they are doing pretty good. But there are few students, and I just want to help each and everybody. It's almost impossible, but I try to. But many students, as you said, they actually are very engaged in my class, very participating, and they are doing pretty good. I mean, being very active. So yeah, but there are some few students, because every student can have different learning style, so just for those students, thank you for your suggestions.
You're welcome.
Priscilla, I think you had a follow-up question.
Yeah, and also I just saw me too. There are a couple of really good suggestions from your colleagues on the chat.
Oh yeah, that's right.
I just wanted to go back to Matthew for a really quick question about when you said the name of the person in the wellness center who handles medical leave. Can you
Yeah, it's not the wellness center. It's the health
I'm
center.
sorry, in the health center. I meant to say health
Her
center.
name is Luz, L-U-Z.
Uh-huh.
Last name Royal, R-U-Y-O-L.
Okay. I'll put it in the chat.
She's an ENT paramedic.
Great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions from anyone else, or comments, or something that you'd like to share?
I was going to ask people if you have had any insights or situations you want to share, ways that you've come up with to help students handle these challenges, because I'm sure that you've all been doing it in multiple ways. So if you feel like sharing here with your colleagues, that would be great.
I mean, I think a lot has already been said, just in terms of, I mean, one of the things that we keep going over and over about being flexible, being real, and, empathizing, showing your students that you're right there with them and you understand what they're experiencing. I don't know if this will answer part of this question, but I was going to share and ask the question. In one of the slides, there was a point made of not spending too much time talking about the COVID situation, which I completely agree with. But I know that some faculty in my department in social science, some of the psychology faculty in particular, have found a way to use the COVID crisis to address issues. I mean, I know, for example, it's just fortuitous. I'm teaching abnormal psychology. So it's easier in a class like that when you're sort of talking about mental health issues and stress and so forth. But, I've created assignments that encourage students to access information that will be helpful for them. Like I have, for example, students researching the website of the American Psychological Association because they have a COVID-19 list on, ways of coping that might be helpful. But that, of course, that's balanced against, having students constantly think about this when some students may be dealing with this in a real way in their life. Like the question Stephanie raised, I mean, this adjunct, I mean, who has a student who's like everybody and has lost everyone in their family. I mean, that student would probably lose it if the professor was giving an assignment like a research on COVID coping or whatever. So it really is, it's a judgment call in terms of, can I provide a little bit that will be useful and supportive and that will get students to engage in some reflective exercises or practices. I know like the archives has invited people to submit things that they're doing in class. So there's a sense that throughout the college, in some classrooms, there is going to be a lot of work, or maybe not a lot, but there's going to be work focused on discussion of COVID and how people are living through this, experiencing it, managing it. And I just think we have to really, be careful about what we do in the classroom. I mean, this is an important time, and for historical reason, it makes sense that we'd want to archive some of this, but it's a balance. And that's just, I hope people are really thinking about that when they're doing this.
I think that's an excellent point, and I just want to chime in a little bit quickly. This, in terms of universal design and considering that students may be in very different places, and we talked about this earlier too, in terms of how they are learning remotely, I think it works here as well. Are there ways that you can consider there might be options to offer students around certain content areas, so that if somebody is triggered by too much dealing with the virus, they have an option to go to that's going to take them in a different regard. And then seeing their classmates' stuff related to COVID also might help them get into it in a different way. Just a couple of thoughts.
No, and you're right, Priscilla. And one of the things I've found in some of the discussion board assignments that I've given that's been around COVID, it's been really nice to see students supporting others and giving students suggestions on what they do and what might be helpful. So that's been a really nice sort of outcome of this, of one of the discussions that I've created. But you have to really be thoughtful about how you're using this if you are going to use this in the classroom.
I completely agree. Yeah.
Can I just ask a general question about how students are utilizing the Wellness Center at this time, Frank and Shante?
Yep.
And
Matthew.
Matthew, I'm sorry.
Sure.
I just had a senior moment.
So early on, when we first began working from home, we immediately reached out to our current clients. So I had the staff reach out to their caseload of clients to see where they're at first and foremost, and then to ask if they were interested in either telecounseling by phone,
right,
or video counseling. So offering the option first. For many of our students, well, I shouldn't say for many, for some of our students, they were not interested in continuing services because of the transition. So just sort of getting acclimated first was at the forefront of their thinking. And then for some of our students, they were okay with telecounseling or video counseling. And then we had a percentage of students, as I mentioned earlier, who because of circumstances at home, were not able to engage in counseling. Again, whether it was for privacy reasons or familial issues, relationship concerns, they weren't able to participate. So we, across the board, I work with the other directors within CUNY's counseling centers, and the directors all agreed that taking on new clients wasn't in line with best practices at this time. I won't go into detail as to the reason why, but we are seeing students and working with students who would like services, but we're working to provide referrals for them. So we'll meet with them multiple times, but the idea is to refer them to an off-site agency. That may change over the summer and beyond, but right now across the board within all the community counseling centers, there was an agreement not to take on new clients.
And the way to for students to contact the Wellness Center is just to go to the email address that's on the slides, correct?
Yep. Yeah, that's the
for
quickest
referral.
Yes. So we have, yeah, they could write in email. We get back to them same day, or they can call in the office as well. We've set up a structure so that the calls were transferred to our cell phones.
Okay. There's a quick question in terms of the referrals. What kind of outside referrals do you provide?
So if a student is looking for long-term care, we'll gather information first about where they live geographically. Well, that doesn't even matter at this point because it's all virtual. But understanding their insurance, so gathering that information. And then we have a resource list that we work with. So we will work to connect them with an outside agency if that's what they're looking for. So if they're looking for long-term counseling, we'll connect them with an outside agency. If they're looking for information on, let's say, coping with anxiety, we have resources available. And if they're looking for something more immediate where they need to speak with someone, we have been utilizing NYC Well a lot. They've been fantastic. I mean, we've worked with them for a number of years now. It's a 24/7 hotline where there's mental health professionals available to provide short-term counseling and also provide resources rather, and referrals.
Are all or any of these services free for students, or do they have to pay for anything?
So NYC Well is a free hotline, so there's no fee involved. If we do make a referral to an agency, some, but not many, are free. Some are low fee, and some come with a cost. It's helpful when the student has good insurance, which, as we know, is probably not the case. But we'll work with them to make sure that they're equipped with information so that they can make the connections. And again, we're there to support them through the process because finding an agency, a therapist it's a lot to navigate through. So we'll work with them throughout the process.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much again, Frank, Shante, and Matthew. This has been really helpful. As we mentioned in our registration link, we are committed to making sure that we can run this session again if possible. We understand the difficult times, but we're going to do our best to make sure that we can run this session again. In the meantime, I will put this recording up on YouTube along with the resources that Matthew, Frank, and Shante have shared, so that it's available to all of you and also available to people who were not available to join us. I will be sending that email within a couple of hours later today. So that's it for this session. Thank you once again to all of you for joining us. And by the way, there's a Q&A session for those of you who are interested on Blackboard. It's this coming Friday at 2 p.m. in the afternoon. I'm going to announce that in an email a little later, but it's this Friday, 2 p.m. Q&A session on Blackboard. We have run a number of sessions on Blackboard, so we're opening this up to any questions that faculty may have. I will be sending that in an email in a few hours as well. All right. Thank you
Pablo,
once again. Yes,
just
Frank.
one very quick announcement. May is Mental Health Awareness Month. So we will be sending out an email this week listing all of our programs that we're going to be offering. We're going to continue running a series of mental health forums addressing different topics. So we'll have the dates, times available in the email this week. I just want to make a note of that.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Frank. Thank you, everyone. Stay
Thank you.
safe. Have a
You
good
too. Be well, everyone.
You take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.